Good evening. This is Atheist History Week, and I'm John Rafferty, President of the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and also a proud and active member of New York City Atheists, which produces this show. We look at the week's anniversaries in the history of free thought, of atheism, agnosticism, secularism, humanism, rationalism, whatever you have ism, but not theism. We check in on people's birth dates or death dates, or those dates on which some important event took place, say a book or a play, premiere of a play or a movie or whatever that had something important to do in the history of free thinking. We do look at religion, as a matter of fact. We look at those fun and games that religion is always promoting, like burnings at the stake and pogroms and mass slaughters and all those other faith-based initiatives that history provides us with. Let's start this week with an event rather than a person. And on January 22, we celebrate the anniversary of the decision in Roe v. Wade. The majority opinion of which was written by Justice Blackmun. And let me just read one sentence, which I think is key. This right of privacy, whether it be founded in the 14th Amendment's concept of personal liberty and restrictions upon state actions, as we feel it is, or as the district court determined in the 9th Amendment's reservation of rights to the people, is broad enough to encompass a woman's decision whether or not to terminate her pregnancy. This right of privacy, the majority on the Supreme Court 40 years ago determined that people have a right to privacy. And when I say people, you might have thought, wait a minute, women. No. Because Roe v. Wade affected both sexes, affected everybody, because it determined that we have a right to privacy, which had never been spelled out before. Which means it was not a new idea in American thought. The whole idea not the whole idea, but an important idea during the American Revolution was leave me alone. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says that the government cannot invade your home. And the Fifth Amendment strengthens that. One of the complaints in the Declaration of Independence, a very important one, was that the king was quartering soldiers in people's private homes. The idea was, leave me alone. The court extended that in the case of Roe v. Wade to your body as well as your home. And that your body is your own, and stay the hell off my body. It came as simple as that. Of course, this has driven the right-wing religionists and fundamentalists crazy, because they really do want to tell you with whom and how you can make love, what you can do with your body, and all the rest of it. By the way, this right to privacy is going to extend in the very near future, I am quite certain, to the right of people to choose when they die. That nobody is going to have, in another generation or less, nobody's going to have to go to court and say, I'm in horrible pain and I want to die. People are going to say, I want to die, and they're going to do it themselves, period. Why should the rest of us have anything to say about it? Okay, Roe v. Wade, January 22nd, about 40 years ago. I forgot to look up the exact year. But in terms of American freedom, probably no person, man or woman, is more important than Tom Paine. who was born on January 29th in 1737. born in England, but he came to the United States after a couple of failed business ventures in England, where he wrote Common Sense. In 1776, which was the most important document, even more important in terms of getting popular support for the revolution, even more important than the Declaration of Independence. It fanned how important, one contemporary writer said that without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been wielded in vain. Okay. Common Sense was a huge success. It was sold out in bookstores the day that people lined up when bookstores announced, we'll have Common Sense on Tuesday. People were waiting in line on Tuesday morning for the bookstores to open to read Common Sense. It was a huge success and very, very important to the development of the American revolutionary spirit. Okay, comes the revolution, wins the revolution, and we move on. And Tom Paine then hit hard times because he was an 18th century freethinker, which meant pretty much a deist. However, he wrote a classical criticism of the Bible, The Age of Reason, in 1792. And so 16 years after Common Sense, the first volume of The Age of Reason comes out, and he's immediately attacked as an atheist and, a corrupter of youth and morals and all the rest of it. I believe that religious duties, he wrote, consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish Church, by the Roman Church, by the Greek Church, by the Turkish Church, by the Protestant Church, nor by any church that I know of. My own mind is my own church. And for this, he was roundly, not just criticized, but ostracized. Organized religion, he wrote, was set up to terrify and to enslave, to monopolize power and profit. Yeah, what's the problem? As far as I'm concerned, Paine hit it right on target. He repudiated the divine origin of Christianity on the grounds that it was, quote, too absurd for belief, too impossible to convince, and too inconsistent to practice. He went to France to join in the revolution in France that began in 1789 and by 1792 was degenerating into the Reign of Terror, and he got caught up in it. He was even a member of the National Assembly in France, but he was on the wrong side of a couple of votes. By wrong side, meaning that he just was in the minority. I don't even know on what, but the point is that wound him up in prison waiting for the guillotine. Probably the only thing that prevented him from being executed was the fact that he was still popular with a great many people in the United States, particularly the people who favored the French Revolution, the Jeffersonian, what they were then called Democratic Republicans. Okay. But he was rescued from prison, where he was slowly dying of starvation and filth in a dungeon. He was rescued by James Monroe, who of course later became, who was then our ambassador to France, and who later became the President of the United States. Monroe and his wife nursed Paine back to health, and he finished the second volume of The Age of Reason, which just turned even more Americans against him because it was absolutely anti-church, anti-organized religion. Whenever we read the obscene stories, he wrote, the voluptuous debaucheries, the cruel and tortuous executions, the unrelenting vindictiveness with which more than half the Bible is filled, it would be more consistent that we call it the word of a demon than the word of God. It is a history of wickedness that has served to corrupt and brutalize. That's Tom Paine in the second volume of the... And that is why, even a century after his death, one of our presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, referred to Paine as that filthy little atheist. Paine, who, by the way, gave us our name, the United States of America. When we were becoming a country, there were a great many ideas. We were going to be called Columbia or Washingtonia or some other thing like that. And Paine was the one who suggested, very simply, the United States of America. He called us, he gave us our name. And Theodore Roosevelt called him that filthy little atheist. I'm a fan of Teddy Roosevelt, but I don't like that one very much. At any rate, that's Tom Paine, who was born January 29th in 1737. Also of the Revolutionary era in America is our second president, John Adams. And the American public is a lot more familiar with John Adams since the HBO series last year. But that kind of sugar-coated Adams' career. Adams was a querulous little man who, he was very important. He was very important to the development of the country and everything else. But he was a little vain, a glory seeker, and carried grudges for years and years and years. However, let's talk about John Adams, the freethinker. John and Abigail were Unitarians, by the way, and in mid-18th century America, Unitarians had were only just becoming acceptable in polite society. If John had been born in 1635 instead of 1735 and been a Unitarian in Massachusetts, he would have been hanged, because Unitarians do not believe in the Trinity. Neither does anyone else who has a working organ between their ears, but okay. He went to Harvard, ministerial studies. His father wanted him to be a minister, and he went to Harvard originally to study for the ministry, but he switched to law and didn't want to become a young minister, because, as he wrote, people are not disposed to inquire for piety, integrity, good sense, or learning in a young preacher, but for stupidity, irresistible grace, and original sin. Okay. Remember, he was a free thinker. He was way ahead of his time in terms of working for the separation of church and state. And there was probably no one of the colonies where church and state were more solidly intertwined than his own Massachusetts. And as a matter of fact, in the Massachusetts constitutional conventions of 1779, and even in 1820, when they were rewriting their constitution, he fought for the separation of church and state. It didn't work. Finally, Massachusetts in the 1830s, after Adams died in 1825, they finally incorporated the separation of church and state in the Massachusetts Constitution. Adams, yes, believed in God. Adams was a Unitarian, but Adams had no truck for organized religion. He once wrote to Thomas Jefferson, 20 times in the course of my late readings, I have been on the point of breaking out. This would be the best of all worlds if there were no religion in it. But, like Franklin, whom we mentioned last week, he also thought when he said, he agreed with Franklin when he said, without religion, this world would be something not fit to be mentioned in polite company. I mean hell. Because Adams, he led a revolution that made possible the ascent of the common man, but he didn't much believe in the basic goodness of the common man. He thought that the common man needed religion to keep him in line and tell him if he steps out of line, he's going to spend eternity in hell. He, as a Unitarian, he did not believe in miracles or prophecies or eternal damnation or demonic possession. But he did believe in an afterlife. I think for emotional reasons. He had children who died. He had very close to his own parents. He great love for his wife, and he felt that, I think he hoped that there would be something in the afterlife where they would continue. If I did not believe in a future state, he wrote, I would believe in no God. Well, okay. As far as I'm concerned, that's a rational conclusion. Don't believe in God. He got in trouble with some of his remarks, but most of his I shouldn't say religious, but anti-religion comments were in private letters, not in public statements. One of which was on when he was talking about the mythical basis of Christianity, that God became man. He referred to it as this awful blasphemy. And until this awful blasphemy is got rid of, there will never be any liberal science in the world. Something that applies today, absolutely, when we have people who deny basic facts of science because it does not agree with the writings of illiterate, or I shouldn't say illiterate, but ignorant shepherds and mule drivers who lived 2,000 and more years ago, and who thought that the sun revolved around the earth, which was flat. Any rate, that's John Adams, born January 30th in 1735, and lived until July 4th, 1825, the date on which he and Thomas Jefferson both died. Contemporaneous with John Adams and Tom Paine, and an ocean apart, was Frederick II. King of Prussia. Frederick the Great, who was born on January 24th in 1712. Okay, a Prussian monarch, a freethinker? Sounds like a contradiction in terms, and just about is, except it's true. Frederick was called the enlightened despot. Born in, palace and the whole thing. However, he had a hell of a childhood. His father was a disciplinarian to the point of sadism, made sure that he got a severe military education from early childhood on. And his father once beat Frederick severely, beat him for some minor transgression in public. in public, in front of the court, in front of the army, beat Frederick. I mean, this is the guy who later on has to be the king, okay? And you beat on him in public, okay, when he was 18 years old. When he, and also about that time, when in his late teens or early 20s, he was thinking of getting out of Prussia, running away. I mean, and he wrote a letter to a friend, and they were conspiring to run away together. There's a lot of indications that Frederick was gay, by the way, but so maybe that was part of the thing. But anyway, he was looking to run away. Father's spies intercepted the letter, and Frederick had to stand there and watch while his friend's head was cut off. What a family. At any rate, he ascended the throne in 1740, if you've done the arithmetic, 28 years old, and he immediately set about a great many reforms. By the way, he by this time he was in close contact by mail. He was getting his ideas from Voltaire and other French philosophes who were preparing the intellectual groundwork for the French Revolution. Frederick, maybe one of the reasons that revolution did not break out in Prussia was the reforms that Frederick instituted. He abolished serfdom, he permitted freedom of speech, and enforced universal religious toleration, did not let any of the minor duchies and baronies within Prussia to enforce religious intolerance, or whatever you want to call it. He promoted education and the arts with state money. He improved infrastructure with the building of roads and bridges, and started industries in Prussia that started manufactures. Remember, 18th century, a great many people thought that this was something that aristocracy did not dirty their hands with. And his court, which I believe was at Potsdam, it became a center of the Enlightenment philosophy, and teachers and philosophers and writers from all over Europe came to his court. He, of course, had an arranged marriage, but he separated from her and very early on, and they did not really live together, which, of course, fuels the argument that he was probably gay. He's not known to have any mistresses, and he was, a product of his times as well as a leader of his times. So Prussia, military adventures, they expanded the territorial, the territory of Prussia, and but enriched Prussia at the same time. And he codified German law along the way and brought it all under one system, so that the laws were the same from town to town and duchy to duchy, and he abolished torture. All of which, when you come to think of it, was probably, that thought only occurred to me a couple of minutes ago, but probably was a buffer that prevented the revolution of 50 years later from taking place in Prussia. Of course, though, the then King of Prussia aligned himself, I guess it was Frederick's son, I don't know, lined up with the most reactionary elements of aristocracy in Europe to help crush, or to try to crush, the French Revolution. He had absolute power. He was an absolute monarch, but he liked to call himself the first servant of the state. Prolific writer. His writings fill over 30 volumes, and in one of them, he is quoted as, "Religion is the idol of the mob. It adores everything it does not understand. We know the crimes that fanaticism in religion has caused."